Graham Langston's real estate baron, suit sharper than a razor blade, sitting in court like it was his private theater, and the show was all about him. He let out this big, booming laugh, one of those "I own this town" kind of sounds, right in the middle of a small claims hearing in Savannah, Georgia. The courtroom was warm and glowing, sunlight pouring through the tall windows, but his energy chilled everything. At the other end of the courtroom sat Marisol Vega. No silk, no noise, just a stack of papers, a worn notebook, and that steady look of someone who'd been through worse than courtroom theatrics. She didn't blink when he laughed. She didn't even shift. She just stared back like she was waiting for a man to run his mouth straight off a cliff. "Your Honor," Graham chuckled, eyes flicking over to the judge, "this woman is nothing but a squatter with delusions of legal grandeur." A few people in the back snorted. Probably his people. You could spot them easy. Suede shoes, smug faces, and that nervous chuckle rich folks have when they laugh just 'cause the boss did. But the judge, she wasn't laughing. "Mr. Langston," she said, real slow, like her voice was made of molasses, and quiet warning. "This is a courtroom, not a comedy club. Keep it respectful." He didn't apologize, just leaned back in his chair, lips curled like he was about to order a martini instead of eat legal consequences. See, here's the thing. Graham thought he was just swatting away some random tenant who got too big for her britches. What he didn't realize? Marisol Vega had spent the last year turning her eviction into a blueprint for revenge. Not the messy kind, with screaming and bat swinging, but the cold, calculated kind that flips your own contracts against you. She wasn't just defending herself. She was cracking open years of shady landlord practices, loopholes he'd exploited, properties he'd acquired through intimidation, and city code violations swept under the rug with a check and a handshake. This wasn't about back rent. This was a chess game. And Graham? He'd just laughed at the woman who came in holding checkmate. To her, this wasn't personal. It was precision. She'd studied legal statutes between shifts, called in favors from every neighbor he'd ever booted, and built a case so tight it could strangle him with his own signature. While he laughed, she let him dig. While he gloated, she calculated. And while the judge scribbled a few notes, she was already picturing Langston's name on the losing side of a judgment. But nobody saw it coming, not yet. Because in that room, full of leather-bound arrogance and sunlit drama, Marisol looked like the underdog. But she wasn't. She was the storm. And it was just starting to rain. Graham Langston strutted out of that courtroom like he'd just won a damn Oscar. Smug as hell, grinning like he'd just squashed a bug beneath one of his Italian leather loafers. Reporters outside didn't even ask questions. Just snapped photos and threw around his name like it was worth something more than ink and ego. And Marisol Vega? She didn't follow. She didn't speak. She just waited until the laughter faded and the courtroom cleared out. Graham Langston strutted out of that courtroom like he'd just won a damn Oscar. Smug as hell, grinning like he'd just squashed a bug beneath one of his Italian leather loafers. Reporters outside didn't even ask questions. Just snapped photos and threw around his name like it was worth something more than ink and ego. And Marisol Vega, she didn't follow. She didn't speak. She just waited until the laughter faded and the courtroom cleared out. Then she walked up to the clerk's desk, calm and quiet, like she was ordering coffee and not setting off a legal nuke. "This is for the record," she said, sliding a thick manila folder across the polished wood. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "History," Marisol said simply, "with receipts." Inside the folder, oh man, it wasn't just paper. It was dynamite wrapped in legalese. Land deeds from the 1940s. Tax records that stretched back generations. Letters, photographs, scans of contracts, half of which were so old they still smelled like typewriter ink. But the real kicker, a certified mineral rights document from 1963, signed by the state, filed under the name Alejandro Vega, Marisol's grandfather. And guess what? That land Langston built his shiny luxury condos on The wine bars and rooftop pools and overpriced yoga studios. Yeah, it all sat on top of land that didn't technically belong to him. Not below the surface anyway. Langston owned the surface estate, sure. But the mineral estate, that belonged to Alejandro Vega's heirs. And since Langston never legally secured those subsurface rights, which his lawyers conveniently overlooked, or maybe just didn't care to dig deep enough to notice, Marisol, she had leverage. Big, scary, lawsuit-filing, empire-threatening leverage. See, in legal terms, the mineral estate supersedes the surface estate in Georgia. If you own what's underneath, you've got serious say in what happens above. And if those rights weren't transferred properly, which they weren't, Langston's multi-million-dollar development was sitting on borrowed land, literally. And Marisol had just called in the debt. She had already pre-filed a claim with the county registrar. A quiet move, no press, no drama. She wanted the law to hit before the headlines did. The moment the clerk stamped that document and logged the transfer of claim, the county would legally recognize her as the rightful heir of the mineral estate. And Langston? Well, he'd be lucky if all he lost was money. Because this wasn't just a paperwork glitch. This was potential environmental violations, illegal development, tax fraud if the wrong boxes weren't checked years ago. And depending how much Marisol wanted to push it, he could be forced to pause construction, evict tenants, even tear down parts of his so-called legacy. Tick, tick, boom. While Langston basked in his illusion of victory, Marisol left the courthouse with no cameras in her face, no microphones chasing her down. Just that quiet power, the kind that doesn't need noise to feel dangerous. She knew what she'd started. She knew what was coming. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And Graham Langston, he wasn't about to learn a lesson. He was about to lose everything. Because sometimes the loudest roar doesn't come from a courtroom tirade. It comes from a deed with a woman's name on it. And this roar had just been recorded. 2 days. That's all it took. Just 48 hours after Marisol slid that manila folder across the desk like it was nothing. Headlines exploded like confetti at a scandal parade. Judge orders immediate halt on Langston's $80 million waterfront expansion. Langston's empire didn't shake. It cracked. His office phone started ringing at 6:13 a.m. and didn't stop for 12 straight hours. Investors, developers, board members. That one hedge fund guy who always showed up late to meetings but first to panic. Everyone wanted answers, and all Graham Langston had were excuses soaked in bourbon and denial. "She's bluffing," he told them all, pacing the marble floor of his penthouse suite. "It's a stunt. Some loophole nonsense. My lawyers will crush it by lunch." But lunch came and went, and so did dinner. And by 10:42 p.m., his legal team was still spinning circles around a fact they couldn't erase. He never secured the mineral rights. And that tiny oversight, it was now a court-sanctioned legal fireball headed straight for his glass tower. Meanwhile, Marisol? She wasn't bluffing. Hell no. She was orchestrating. First, she filed a quiet title action, a legal move that basically asked the court to settle, once and for all, who truly owned the land. And since her claim came stacked with original deeds, tax filings, and a clear line of inheritance, it wasn't looking good for the Silk Suit Mafia. Then came the cease and desist, a full stop on any and all construction, modifications, or sales involving the disputed land. Contractors were told to pack it up. Surveyors got pulled. Half-built condos stood like skeletons of bad decisions under the Georgia sun. But the real masterstroke? Her lawyer. Enter Noah Escalante. Mid-30s, Cuban-American, wears sharp suits and sharper ambition, with courtroom swagger that made junior associates take notes and senior partners feel underdressed. He was a rising star, the kind of guy the legal world watched from behind tinted glasses, unsure if he was a genius or a chaos merchant. And Marisol? She was the reason he even got into law. Her grandfather, Alejandro Vega, had once pulled Noah out of a bad spot. a broke teenager teetering between dropping out and giving up. Alejandro offered him a job fixing fences on that same land Langston now squatted over. Paid him fair, treated him like kin, told him, "Use your mind, mijo. That's how you beat men like them." So when Marisol called, he didn't just say yes. He cleared his whole damn week. And here's the part that made Langston sweat through 3 tailored shirts in one day. They weren't suing for a payout. They weren't playing ball. They wanted the land. Every acre, every deed, every dirty contract flipped and examined under a microscope. They wanted control. And they had the receipts, emails, photos, even drone footage showing Langston's team drilling without permits in restricted areas. Stuff his PR machine thought was buried. Marisol dug it up with the patience of someone raised on stories of land taken and names erased. She didn't want to humiliate him. She wanted to reverse history. And suddenly, the man who laughed in a courtroom was the one sweating in depositions, losing sleep, losing investors, losing grip. Langston's empire didn't fall in an earthquake. It trembled in silence, paper by paper, step by step, until the foundation started whispering, "You never owned this." By the time the city inspectors showed up in orange vests and clipboards like they meant business, and oh, they did, Langston's smile had officially left the building. Marisol Vega didn't just have a case anymore. She had a countdown. The receipts started unspooling like a damn thriller novel. First, it was internal memos, emails where Langston's team casually discussed fast-tracking inspections. Then came documents showing environmental impact reports that had been, let's say, massaged to avoid triggering red flags. And buried in a folder labeled MySC Urgent was the real kicker. A memo about a waste management issue involving unfiltered runoff into a nearby stream. Never reported, never cleaned up. Oops. Marisol handed it all over to the right people. Quietly. Precisely. And with each new file, the paper trail bled a little more red ink. You know what they say. Cut corners long enough and eventually someone bleeds. Then came the whistleblower. A former city planning intern, fresh out of grad school and tired of pretending the system wasn't rigged. She'd sat through too many closed-door sessions, watched too many permits rubber-stamped after mysterious late-night meetings at Langston's favorite steakhouse. And when she saw Marisol on the news, that was her breaking point. She stepped forward and brought hell with her. Turns out, Langston hadn't just missed a few inspections. He'd buried entire reports. The kind of stuff that could stop a project cold. Unsafe foundations, illegal asbestos removal, utilities rerouted without permission. Things that would make city officials go pale and start calling lawyers at lunch. And then, like fate decided to pour one more shot on the fire, a judge. Different court, different case, unsealed an easement dispute that Langston thought he'd buried 6 years ago. A tiny slice of land less than 10 feet wide, but legally crucial. Because without it, the entire infrastructure of his flagship development was considered non-compliant. In legal speak, that's structural death. His legal team saw it and hit DEFCON 1. They urged him to settle, to throw Marisol a pile of hush money and walk away with whatever pieces were left. But Graham Langston? Oh no. That man would rather choke on his own paperwork than admit he'd lost to a former waitress with a binder full of truth. Pride had carried him this far, straight into the lion's mouth. And now, he couldn't turn around without tripping over his own arrogance. So he stood in his high-rise office, staring at a skyline he might not legally own, while liens started stacking like dominoes on his desk. Contractors pulled out. Insurance flagged his policies for review. And Marisol, she didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, just kept turning over stones, handing evidence to people who'd been too scared or too paid to look before. Because she wasn't in this for clout. She was in it to undo every shady deal made over her grandfather's bones. Undo every piece of paper that claimed her family's land was just a blip on a developer's map. Undo a man who thought money could erase legacy. But Graham forgot one thing. Pride don't pay liens. And this paper trail, It was bleeding out fast. They came early. Press, protesters, people with signs that read Vega v. Goliath and Justice has roots. The courthouse steps were packed like a music festival. Only instead of a headliner, they were here to witness a reckoning. Inside, standing room only, reporters clutched notepads like weapons. Courtroom artists sketched faster than they could blink, and the tension. You could cut it with a spoon and still feel it slice. At the center of it all, Marisol Vega. Black blazer, no flash, no frills, just quiet fire and that same calm stare she'd worn the day Langston laughed at her like she was a punchline. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't blinking. She was ready. Langston, on the other hand, wasn't doing so hot. He sat across the aisle, jaw tight, tie crooked, red face like a busted fire hydrant. His lawyers flanked him like bodyguards, whispering panic in both ears. But it was too late for whispers. The storm had already hit. And now, it was time to see who survived. The judge, a sharp woman with no time for theatrics, cleared her throat and dropped the verdict like it weighed 1,000 bricks. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Marisol Vega. Just like that, the room snapped. Gasps, scribbles, a single clapping hand in the back before it was shushed by court security. But the judge wasn't done. She kept going, line by devastating line. Not only was the land confirmed to belong to Marisol, via mineral and inheritance rights dating back decades, but Langston's entire estate, including his mansion, his in-ground pool, that ridiculous wine cellar he bragged about in Architectural Digest, all of it now sat on land he had no legal claim to. Let that sink in. The house he built to lord over Savannah? Eviction proceedings were set to begin within 30 days. And the cherry on top of this karma sundae? Langston was ordered to pay back rent, per a square foot dating back 7 years, calculated using current market rates, 7 figures, non-negotiable. He nearly choked. His lawyer objected, then immediately withdrew when the judge glared him into submission. Langston's jaw flapped like a broken window shutter. But no words came. Just rage, just disbelief. Just the hollow realization that everything he thought he owned, every brick, every spotlight, every imported tile, never truly belonged to him. And there stood Marisol, calm, steady, not smug, just complete. She stepped forward, signed the documents with a pen that probably cost less than Langston's shoelaces, and reclaimed the very dirt her family was buried in. It wasn't just a win, it was a return. Langston watched her walk past, eyes locked on her like he still couldn't believe it, couldn't accept it. But Marisol didn't even look at him, because the fight was never personal, it was principle. And the hammer? It had just dropped. Weeks pass, the noise dies down, courtrooms quiet, headlines fade. But the land remembers. Graham Langston's once grand estate stands empty now. No staff, no catered luncheons, no imported wines chilling beneath chandeliers, just silence, stretched wide beneath a Savannah sky that's seen everything and forgotten nothing. Vines creep up the marble columns like nature's reclaiming its tab. Cracks spider across walkways that once echoed with expensive shoes and louder egos. Marisol Vega stands at the edge of the property, barefoot, toes in the dirt. Her younger brother, Mateo, walks beside her, kicking up the red dust like it's a memory. They don't speak at first. They don't need to. The wind moves through the tall grass and whispers, only they understand. This was their grandfather's land. This was where he tilled the soil with cracked hands and quiet strength. Where he taught them to respect what could grow, not just what could be sold. Langston wanted to erase that, build over it, concrete it into silence. But now it breathes again. "I could have flipped it," Marisol says suddenly, scanning the horizon. "Developers already made offers, big ones." Mateo raises an eyebrow. "You gonna?" She shakes her head, slow and steady. "I'm gonna restore it." They walk past what used to be Langston's pool, now a dried-out, cracked basin, full of leaves and judgment. Marisol gestures toward the open field behind it. Right here? Community garden. Fresh produce for anyone who needs it. No ID, no questions, just food and soil. She turns to the south end of the estate, where Langston once tried to build an exclusive yoga pavilion. That'll be a legal aid center, for tenants, for women. For anybody who's ever been told, sorry, you can't afford justice. Mateo blinks at her. You're turning a mansion into a mission. Marisol smiles. Nah, I'm turning it into a mirror. They keep walking, past the cracked fountain and the overgrown hedges, until they reach the edge of the property. The sunset drips gold over the trees. It's quiet, but not empty. It feels alive. Mateo stops. Can I ask you something? Shoot. Why didn't you take his money? You could have walked away rich. She looks out over the land, then down at her bare feet. The earth still warm, still familiar. Because he built on land that never forgot who it belonged to. She glances at him, soft smile, eyes full of fire and peace all at once. I didn't need his money. She nudges the dirt with her toes. I had roots. The camera pans out. No gloating, no champagne toast, no Langston silhouette shouting in the background. Just a woman, a field, and a future that's finally hers, not revenge.